Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast. Is it time for a career change? We have another exciting episode for you today, but first we want to thank those of you who have supported us. Please tell others about the podcast, where they can find it wherever they get their podcasts. Rate us and subscribe on YouTube and Rumble if you'd like to watch and listen. Next, don't forget about the Forward High Performance Planner that will be available within a couple of weeks. Don't buy a planner until you check ours out. Now back to, is it time for a career change? Did you know that on average, 30% of Americans change their career fields? Career choices do not have to be permanent. With time, interests, and life circumstances can lead us to transition into new careers. In this episode, we will discuss how to identify if you're ready for a change and how to make and carry out a plan to do so with minimal strain. Ron, 30%, do you find that number surprising?
Kristin, I would have 15, 20 years ago, but not now, because if you think about the information highway, people are totally in tune with the competitors. They're in tune with their friends and their salaries and what other companies are doing. You can look up mission statements right on the internet. So I think that has bolstered people seeking other career opportunities. And you've got coaches and you've got all these ads running of entrepreneurs. And I've talked to a lot of Gen Z age group who say they want to be an entrepreneur. They don't want to work for someone. So, and of course, that is a form of a career. So it really doesn't surprise me with all the information that's out there.
Yeah, me neither. I'm with you. I thought I was going to be a lifer in banking. I'm talking like 40 years. But then your eyes do open after a certain period of time and you realize you're not married to it, though it may feel that way. So it's pretty awesome when you can reflect and make a change and feel empowered to do so. And that's what we're here to help you out with in this episode. So I had the honor of speaking with Kevin, a good friend of mine, who has transitioned from a successful career as an architect into being self-employed, building personal aircrafts, and then he transitioned again into a 20-year career working for Lockheed Martin as an aerospace engineer. Now, he did not foresee his life and his career going in this direction, but he said he wouldn't have made a single change. But he did share with me some of the pitfalls that went along with it and gave me some great advice to pass along throughout this episode on how to be successful in making a career change and really how to understand when the timing is right. Now, I want to talk about a few things that Kevin hit on. We want to share this with you today. Ron and I will go back and forth on some really important information. But the one thing that Kevin really shared with me initially was identify your transferable skills that you have in your current position. Research your chosen industry and find out which of your existing skills and strengths apply to it. These typically are going to include soft skills such as teamwork, communication, decision-making, and multitasking. But then he went on to say, with that, determine the skills you need. Where's the gap, right? So identify the hard skills that your new career requires and begin developing them. If you're pursuing your dream job, say as a graphic designer, you might need to learn how to use certain design software. You can try to learn skills yourself or take classes online or at a trade school. You can add these skills to your resume so you can be more competitive when applying for a job in your new career. Now, Ron, walk us through how you did that in your position and tie it back to what you're doing today.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I really like Kevin's comprehensive list. He listed some great information, and I hope if people want to write something down, you write that down. It's important. Yeah. Well, I went to a seminar and I did hear one good thing. Someone said, it was like plan your next career 5 years out. That didn't make as much sense to me, but I found that to be quite helpful. I started seeking what I wanted to do, because with the federal government, even if I stayed the full scale at age 57, you're out when you're federal law enforcement. So I did want to leave a little early, so I would leave on my own terms. I think that was a psychological thing, maybe.
Yeah.
But I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know the framework. So I began to research about a year and a half earlier. I also got the desire to write a book, and I'm not going to make this long. I'm going to be brief because I've talked about the book a lot. But I had started developing things and had some unique stories that people were enjoying. So the feedback that I got, they did not realize that I actually developed some of the things I was sharing with them. So when I saw the response, I thought, I think I have something here. Now, I had the option. I had some pretty major job opportunities. And part of that is just because of the position I held with the federal government. It opens up other opportunities, you might say. So I had to make a decision, entrepreneur, or do I want to switch careers and, stick with the grind? I chose to be an entrepreneur. But I did a lot of things that Kevin said. I did not know marketing. I still have a lot to learn. But I became a student. I began to research. I began to talk to other people who were in marketing. I began to look at pitfalls, and I did hire someone to do marketing. So I think one of the biggest things, and I think this is that fine line, there are some dreamers out there and visionaries, and boy, do I love that. I love to be around those people. But there's some people who jump and they really haven't prepared their parachute.
Right, yes.
So there is a balance between being a visionary and being a realist.
Yes.
And you have to be a realist. I knew I cannot relate. Kristin, I have done events, and it's 3 months before I get paid.
Right.
Now, I'm very fortunate. I receive a federal retirement, but I thought to myself, oh my God, what if I had no income and I'm waiting on these payments to come in? Because you're always buying flights and putting stuff on your credit card. It's almost like a vicious cycle if you don't get paid. So I did have an empty. So I tell people when I coach people, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later in the podcast, but one of the things, as I said, is be prepared to survive 12 months.
Right.
You need to be able to pay your bills 12 months. Now, a visionary does not like to hear that. Plus, in their mind, because they've been operating in a lower income, sometimes a lower income job, or they have high expenses, they're like, how can I do that? And I said, let's figure that out first, how you can function. At least 6 months. I had to negotiate with someone, but I do start with 12 months. But anyway, that's a little bit of the story. I did jump. We'll talk some more about what happened to me, but that was the beginning as I started laying the foundation kind of early.
Yeah, I think that is really smart. And actually, Kevin hit on that too. He said that was one of the pitfalls he experienced. So when he went from being an architect who was successful and actually climbing the ladder, and this is before he was married or anything like that, he made the decision to be self-employed and build personal aircrafts. He said his mom cried. His family thought he was crazy. He did not prepare. He says same thing as you, Ron, 6 to 12 months. You need to be prepared to not have payment. And not because that's how long it takes someone to pay, but you might not start generating income for that period of time when you're an entrepreneur. So that was a pitfall he shared with me. And we'll dive a little bit more into why it's so important to have the support of your family, friends, etc. But that was definitely something he hit on as well. Something else is learn the industry. So familiarize yourself with the industry and its terminology so you can be knowledgeable before being interviewed for a job. Read job descriptions and industry publications and websites to learn the vocab, equipment, and job duties. Add common terms to your resume to show hiring managers that you understand the field. Ron, I'm sure you've interviewed somebody, but you tell me, maybe not, who spoke completely out of context during an interview, and it was very apparent they didn't research the industry or the role, and they were just completely out of touch. Have you experienced that? And if you did you hire them?
I hired them right off the bat.
Yes.
I thought we need that kind of confusion here. It'd be fun. No, because, yes and no. Yes, I've had people ramble off or not really have a grasp of the position. But keep in mind, I was a Federal Law Enforcement Academy director, so you have to have the basics or you've never been a federal agent. I did want to plug something here, Kristin. I have an interview course that people can look on the website, forwardoperations.com. And you said several key things that I talk about in that interview course. But one thing that I mentioned, when you're talking about resumes in preparation for a job, the average HR person looks at a resume 7 to 11 seconds, which means you better load the top 1/3.
Yeah.
So I tell people to put a career objective, not just a career summary, a career objective. And instead of doing, this generic language that everyone uses, find the top 10 companies you want to work for and plug their name right in there.
Oh, wow.
I want to work for this company because I aspire to work for a company that is aspiring to, change the world, whatever that is. But if you're very specific in there, you're letting that company know, I want to work for you. And I've coached so many, primarily younger people, sometimes it's older, but they submit 120 job applications through Monster or one of the other programs, and then they're like, no one's calling me. I'm not getting, and I'm like, be specific, and then call the HR person and say, did you get my resume? If you can start to empower yourself, knowledge is power. And just like Kevin said, learn everything you can, and you want to have the right vocabulary, you want to have the right words in your career summary and in your career objective. The worst thing people can do, and I've reviewed over 100 resumes, Kristin, and I reviewed one not long ago, and this person had all kinds of acronyms, which would have been okay if it was an in-house job, but he was looking at another industry, and I had to be honest. I said, look, I don't even know what you're talking about. We're going to have to go back to some basics. But they would become frustrated. They're explaining it to me. I said, listen, you're not applying for a job with me. That company's not going to understand this.
Right.
You can't explain it to me. We need to change the language in your resume.
Yes.
That's another story.
Well, we touched on this in last week's episode where you need to speak to your audience. You have to adjust what you're saying for the audience. And if it's for an HR person who's looking through resumes, speak to them, and it has to stand out and it has to make sense. So it's powerful stuff right there. Something else I want to segue into, considering life changes that come along with the job change. So you want to identify the parts of your personal life that might change as you prepare for your new career. Now, if you have a family, for instance, you might need additional childcare, or you might have to relocate. Your career transition might also take time away from hobbies and relationships. And Kevin told me that when he left his, like I mentioned earlier, he left his successful job as an architect. Can you imagine? Just put yourself in like his family and friends' shoes. So he's a successful architect. He's building hospitals, doing very well. And he decides, I'm going to be self-employed and I'm going to make personal aircrafts. And he had people that distanced themselves from him. They thought he was literally crazy. And like I said, his mom cried. But he knew, outside of not planning for the shortage of income for the first 6 to 12 months, he knew he was destined for something else. And he did it. And again, though, let me just stress, he was not married at the time of the first job change. So that does play a large role. You can take a little bit more of a risk, I would say, when you don't have kids and you're not married. But he stressed the importance of having a strong support system. Also, so he went from building personal aircrafts to being what do I have here? It's a long, let's see here. He went to work for Lockheed Martin, and he was an aerospace engineer. So going from an architect, self-employed aerospace engineer. When he got the call from someone at Lockheed Martin, he told him he was going to call him back in 15 minutes with an answer. And he called his wife. And she said, what are you waiting for? This is your dream job. And it was awesome that he had the support of his wife, because it was moving from Washington State to Northern California. It was wonderful that he made sure to call her and check in with her, because this was going to completely disrupt their life. That's where their friends and family lived. But she was completely on board and supportive of him and his dream job. And he did end up moving and spending 20 years at Lockheed Martin. But if his wife didn't support him, he said it would have been a very, very difficult transition. Ron, what are your thoughts on and feedback on having the strong support of family and friends?
Well, it's
spouse.
huge. And, I'm in a unique situation. Kristin, I divorced. So I have my oldest daughter lives with me now. And, but I had no idea. That's the one factor. I thought I'd prepared for retirement. I was excited. I was releasing this book. I thought it would do pretty well. And everything's great. And all of a sudden, the pandemic hit. And I'm sitting home alone. And I remember when I actually retired, I carried 2 phones my whole career. I turned in a phone, which was liberating. But I plugged in a laptop in the room that I am right now. And as I worked for a while, it started getting very lonely. And I'd never experienced lonely. Like, I cherished a few moments alone. But the problem was, it wasn't the being alone. If I'm watching TV or I'm just reading a book, I love being alone. I was used to collaborating.
Right.
That's like, Kristin, I was not going to start a podcast, no matter, the situation, if I didn't have a partner.
Right.
And I wanted someone to collaborate with because I realized that's my leadership style.
Yes, I'm the same.
So I'm developing these presentations from scratch, doing what I was trained to do, and I've always felt I was creative, but it didn't have the same pizzazz. So I started calling a couple of people, and it just so happened that the IT person that worked for me had moved back home during the pandemic, gave up his apartment in Charleston, called me and said, hey, is there any way I could stay with you a few days until I find a place to live? Because they had reconstituted. And I said, I'll do you better than that. If you can help me in the evenings edit an 8-hour leadership course, you can just stay here as long as you need. So that was immediately, the whole atmosphere changed for me. He was a great guy and a fitness guru, so we worked out. It was great. Then I started bringing on other volunteers. And this is the one thing I want to say. We're talking about a career change. So if you're going with a company, you may have automatic, people and relationships and that type thing.
Right.
But in the entrepreneur world, you may not.
Right.
You would be surprised what people will volunteer to help you do if you inspire them, if they believe in your vision. But don't forget about them. Every person that helped me and volunteered, I have paid for different projects. Some have come on too, which Kristin, have come on with us on Forward Operations. So, don't forget people who help you, but you will be surprised how much your friends, if it is just to share one of your posts on social media, one of your ads, or, promote your book. I tell people, and Kristin, we're going to talk about this because I'm excited about your book, but you build a book release team,
right.
a BRT, and you get a whole team around you to help you release that book. And so it's very, very important. You're going to have down moments. There's not many people who strike gold immediately. I know you think you will, and I thought I would, but there was a lot of learning, a lot of building that I had to do, and it just is what it is.
Right. That is such gold advice, Ron. And I appreciate your vulnerability on that, because that is something that can happen when you are going from an environment where you have people, even if you're working remote, you're constantly interacting. Someone's also always pinging you or emailing you, or you're on virtual calls. So you have a lot of interaction, even if it's not in person. And to go from that, I've been there where you don't have that collab team, and it can feel lonely, and it's just an adjustment period. I know that just commenting on when you are making that change, especially if you're going into an entrepreneurial type of environment, it is important that, and even retirement, gosh, we can talk on retirement too, Ron. Kevin even hit home on it. When he finally retired from his third career, he said he did feel like he lacked purpose. What's my purpose now? I'm so used to being important and needed, and providing people with knowledge. You know what he did? He ended up going and teaching at a high school, taught engineering at a local high school that was in need, and then did another teaching course, I believe, through the local college. And then he decided, I can retire now. I put my time in with the kids. I'm good. But it is important. And now he has hobbies, right? So Ron, talk to us about, for people that have retired and want to go into a second career post-retirement, or want to just do something that they can use all their skills on, what are your suggestions for them?
I think that's a great question. I usually, as long as someone can make it financially, I think they should seek out something they're really passionate about. It might even be volunteerism, but something that they're really passionate about. I knew someone high up in the government, they always loved animals, started volunteering at a animal shelter.
Oh, I love that.
But of course, their skill set was so good, the next thing you know, they're running the show. But that was not their intent. They wanted to just go down a few days a week and, help at the animal shelter. So I applaud all of that. But I think you follow that passion, whatever you're passionate about, and that may require another year or two of schooling. I knew someone that retired, went back and got a nursing degree, a completely different career, and they're happy. So I do think in the later years you have to be happy. And Kristin, people don't realize this. I mean, I had a very tumultuous, difficult career. When you're writing federal pre-sentence reports, it's constant, the pressures. And then I went to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and there was a lot of pressures, especially when I got promoted to Academy Director. And in this second part, when I was all but offered some pretty good jobs with the government, I started thinking about me putting the full suit. And I'm talking about 2 of the jobs I would have been working would have been suit and tie every day. You're there at 7:30, and it sickened me. I mean, it was prestigious, big money.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I cannot do this. I want to be an entrepreneur. I was halfway finished with my book when the greatest opportunity presented itself.
Wow.
And I said yes. Now, I want to be vulnerable here because we love these big heroic stories. I literally said yes. I will apply. I will put all of my stuff in, which is a lot. I drove 3 hours. I had a trip. I'm not even going to mention an area, but I had a trip from where I discussed this position, 3-hour trip. And in my car, as I kept going through it, I kept getting this sick feeling, but I kept pushing it aside going, that's crazy. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. I kept telling myself. I even went to bed that night. I didn't sleep well. I felt terrible. But when I would think about the book and I would think about being an entrepreneur, I felt this excitement. I did not feel it about that prestigious position.
Yes.
So the next day I made the phone call and said, I can't do it.
Good for you.
It was amazing to me, though, the individual that had talked to me, who's also pretty high up in the government, said, I wish I'd done the same thing. This person retired, held a similar position as mine, retired, went on with a different agency, which is what he was wanting me to do. And he said, I admire you. I thought he was really going to be going, are you nuts?
Yeah.
But he didn't. But I'm going to be honest with you, Kristin, I didn't tell anybody, especially in law enforcement, that I had a very good shot at this position. Because I'm telling you, the people in law enforcement around me they would salivate to have the position that I had a really good shot getting.
Well, you listened to your gut, and it's such a powerful thing. Who knows? You might have been living on Pepto-Bismol and Tums in that position versus enjoying yourself. Yeah, and that's your gut was telling you that. So that is powerful. We do have that instinct that goes back to ancestral times. So I won't geek out on that too much, but I'm glad that you listened to your body. The body is powerful. So we've talked about life changes and how important it is to have a strong support system when you are making these big changes, especially if you're relocating or it's a significant pay. Say it's a decrease. I know people that have made changes, career changes, and they actually are taking less pay, but they're doing it for a better work-life balance and to do something that they're passionate about. So, but all of that really should be discussed with whoever. If you have a spouse or a partner where you're sharing bills and all of that, you really want to make sure you're on the same page there. But I also, Ron, I want to touch on something because it's not all about the money. And I want to ask if someone out there is wanting to make a career change and their spouse, let's just say, is completely not on board, but they are miserable in what they're currently doing. And they just feel like it's a death sentence, like I can't do this any longer. What kind of conversation tips would you give them to be able to go back and reapproach the conversation with this partner?
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer. That's very difficult, but I would coach them on the power of persuasion and some steps you can take to persuade someone to believe in your vision, because no matter what, you can't, your family is your family, and I've seen people destroy marriages and things just to pursue a career.
Yeah.
I would like to note that was not the case for me, but I think you either have to persuade that person or you have to take steps to survive where you are and try to learn to thrive where you are.
Right.
That's a very difficult situation that you're talking about. But sometimes our approach when we're trying to persuade people, we're so passionate and we get frustrated because someone doesn't sense the passion. I remember I had a friend went off back in the day to an Amway. It's an old, they were some of the first.
My parents did Amway back in the day.
Yeah, and they perfected the conference and the vision casting and the transference of vision. So people would come back and they would get so frustrated if you didn't want to sell Amway products. So I had a good friend that almost destroyed our friendship. Came to me and said, you need to sell it. I said, dude, I'm a federal agent. I'm not selling friggin' Amway, you know, and did the whole spiel. And I kind of laughed, which I shouldn't have. And, I said, you drunk the Kool-Aid. So it put a strain on our friendship for a while.
Yeah.
But these conferences are good. They're really good. The people just have to be careful.
Right,
They have to stay in the real world.
So let's pivot to when you're finally ready to officially make the change or leave, I guess you could say, your current job. If you're employed in a different field, make sure that you resign professionally and on good terms. Give your manager adequate notice, at least 2 weeks, and write a formal resignation letter explaining your departure. Finish existing projects and document your job duties and workflows for a smooth transition out. Keep the doors open, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I couldn't stress that more. So,
and
yeah,
go ahead,
I want your insight.
Well, I'm saying you're right. You want to keep the doors open. You always want to have a good reference, all that. But it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Even if you're frustrated, it's the right thing to do. And the beauty, I do believe, you sow good seed, you're going to reap a good harvest. But I've seen people leave under the wrong terms, and it seems like when you do that, then you undermine your previous employer, then people start to undermine you. I'm not going to say I believe in karma, but I think it's interesting that the way that some of these things seem to work out.
Right.
But it is so vital that you leave in the correct way, that you prepare someone to replace you instead of hoping that the company fails. And that's a difference, that's a maturity level that you have to develop into. That's the walk of life right there, Kristin.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if you've ever had this, but I've had someone give me, this is in banking in a good position, give me 2 to 3 day notice. And I'm like, you realize that goes on a permanent record, right? And then I always wonder about the company who's getting this person before that 2 week period. Yeah. Don't they think, are they going to do that to me when it comes the time? So I think it looks bad on both ends, quite frankly.
And so Kristin, one other quick plug.
Please. I
used that exact situation in the interview course, and when I coach people in interviewing, it's called an assumptive close. I teach them because, the interviewers almost always say, do you have any questions for us?
Right.
And I think it's a good idea to have a couple questions.
I do too.
But an assumptive close is that kind of passive way to make it look like, I assume you're going to hire me. I assume I'm going to get this position. So one of the great questions to ask is, if I get this position, I definitely want to make sure that I don't leave my current employer in a bad situation. How many weeks could I have to help them prepare for my departure?
I love it.
So it's an assumptive close. You're assuming you're going to get that position. Or I'm just going to throw this in for free if you're listening. A great one is there anything that we've discussed here that would give you any hesitation about my capabilities to fill this position?
Oh, wow.
That's a strong one.
That's forward.
It is forward.
W-A-R-D.
You have to think that one through and know your audience. But that is a strong assumptive close. Is there any concerns? The reason I laughed, I was thinking about
if someone
interviews.
said yes.
No, I've had interviews where someone literally looked at me and said, why do you want to hire someone else when they'll have to come to me for the answer?
Well, what's funny is I remember you talking about someone was very assumptive. Yeah. That was humorous.
They were assumptive without the umptive. Anyway.
Exactly. There is a difference. Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, let's talk about, so some career changes may lead you to needing additional schooling or certificates, maybe a license or a degree. So determine the qualifications that you need and the time and money that's going to take. Ron, I know that schooling, I know for you being an entrepreneur, you didn't necessarily have to go to college, right, to go back and sharpen up on any specifics, but there is some continued learning that we really all should be doing just to keep ourselves sharp and really desirable in the workplace or in the workforce. So I'm curious what you would suggest if you know of any things that people should be sharpening up skills on. Maybe it's computer programs, just to stay with the times. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think people have to decide where they want to go, and you start to take the steps. You don't want to, you're going to go into one environment and you start taking courses that don't correlate. So you got to figure out where you want to go. But I will tell you, Kristin, I hired a coach, which was expensive, and there's a time in my life I would have thought that was ridiculous, and then it reaped
like
dividends.
A career coach, right?
I hired a career and marketing coach. Then I also paid to be a part of a 12-week group coaching event. I got tremendous information. Also built relationships because a lot of my working relationships were federal government. So then I've got a network of these marketers that I can call. I called someone not long ago and asked some questions. I did that. I got certified as a life coach online, a week program. Then I'm certified in body language. And I tell everyone, be a lifelong learner.
Yes.
So I'm always learning, growing. When I'm coaching, I learn from the person I'm coaching from. I've learned more about industry. So here's another point I want to make. Time flies. Kristin, we're on episode 23 right now.
Right,
I feel like we started yesterday. I feel like we started talking about this a month ago.
Yeah.
So I tell people 2 years is nothing. Even now they have accelerated bachelor's degree. You can get a bachelor's degree. If you really want to work hard enough, you can get a bachelor's degree in about half the time. So you just do it. You got to dive in on the learning part of it. Get the education, because you do not want to be, please listen to me, you do not want to be a year, 2 years down the road knowing you could have finished and you never even started.
Right.
Don't live with regret.
Yes.
Dive in.
Yes. Amen to that. Okay, so I'm glad you said networking, because we're going to transition over to networking, because I'm sure everyone's heard the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I strongly agree. Unfortunate at times, but accurate. So back to Kevin, he shared with me the man who offered him his dream job at Lockheed Martin knew him through networking while he was in the personal aircraft space. So Kevin made sure that he was out and visible. People could see his aircrafts and they knew who he was. So Ron, I'm sure you have strong opinions on networking.
I do, and I got to use an old cliche. Your network is your net worth.
Yep.
There's no doubt about it. You have to get in certain networks to make sales. You got to get in certain networks to increase your knowledge and build those relationships. We've said this before, but don't be a fake. Don't be a fraud. Go into it legitimately. I've got someone that I shared some information on a program that I was doing because they were going to do the speaking event. Would I have liked to have had that speaking event? The answer is yes, I would have. Right. It's like we're competitors. But guess what? It's a big country. It's a big world. There's plenty of room to go around. Right. So they said, is there any way you would share this presentation? Or no, they didn't even ask for the presentation. They said, you provided some information I was interested in. I said, you want the whole presentation? They're like, what? I said, yeah, I don't have anything to hide. Boom. I fired it off. Guess what? I'm booked up. So, there's that. But yes, your network is your net worth. Your net worth is your network. And surround yourself with some like-minded people. Now, you always need people to challenge you, but you need some like-minded people because they'll motivate you and they understand when you get down and you're feeling alone because they've been there. They're going to say, hey, you can, it's going to come around. Something's going to happen. So I strongly believe in networking.
Yes, me too. I love that. All right, let's talk about updating your resume. And Ron, you've already touched on really how much of an impact it needs to make in a very short period of time. Would you say 11 to 17 seconds is average?
7 to 11 seconds.
7 to 11 seconds.
If it's a larger company. Now,
even shorter.
When I say that, I'm not talking about a mom and pop shop. I'm not talking about, someone that hires 2 employees a year. I'm talking about, pretty major industry.
Yeah,
But the HR person's busy and they fly through. They just make sure you meet the fundamentals and then you go the next level.
Makes sense. I know. Yeah. Well, I was about the same way. I didn't put a lot into resumes. I wanted to get someone on the phone and start feeling them out right away. But it's still important to your point. You want to have the basics on the resume and something that makes it stand out. So as you gain more industry knowledge, this again is for your career change, for your desired next position. As you gain the knowledge, skills, and qualifications, add those to your resume. Highlight your existing skills and experience in different ways and how they apply to your new field. Write an objective statement that explains your career goals and what you can bring to the industry. And you talked about this a little bit earlier, Ron, actually. Also, know what previous experience to remove from your resume if it no longer benefits you or applies to what you're applying for. So this is when applying out. So Ron, do you feel it's necessary? Because again, we're talking about making a career change here. I was reading quite a bit on this. Some people feel it necessary to apply for the entry-level position because you're changing into a new field. But then I read some conflicting articles where people feel like, well, if I was a director of, let's say, banking, I should be able to apply and obtain a role as a director of HR. Is that realistic?
I don't think it is.
Right.
I know some people who had to step down to step up. I knew someone that was so miserable they had to apply for another position, which was a lower position than the one they currently held, but they were able to promote based on their talents and skills. But I think a lateral transfer over, it happens,
right?
But they're going to be looking for a certain skill set that you may not have. The soft skills will pay off, but they may look for certain courses or classes or degrees that you may or may not have. Certainly, like you said, it's who you know. There's things always happen, but it's probably not likely. I think it's okay. Sometimes I think people don't want to look long-term. They look short-term, and they don't want to step it down to step up. But you may have to do that, and especially, like I said, if you're miserable. But Kristin, I wanted to throw in, just because if our listeners have stuck with us, I want to throw in a few quick things about a resume. A resume, now this is just industry standards. This is what people expect. 1 page is 10 years of your life. So if you've worked 20 years, 2 pages. No one wants a catalog for a resume. They just don't. They want to see the highlights because chances are most people applying, like if it's a job that requires a bachelor's degree, then most everyone's going to have that. So not that you leave it off, but I'm saying you want to stand out. You want to put that unique information. I've already said don't use acronyms that the employer's not going to understand.
Right.
Do not have typos. Do not have a typo. Go over that thing with a fine-tooth comb. It looks terrible on you if you have typos or, incorrect sentence structure, things like that. Look it over well. Load up that top 1/3. But learn to just bullet point things. And the beauty is, whether it's Microsoft, Apple, there's all kinds now on the internet. There's all these different templates that you can use that will make your resume look sharp and stand out. If you're in marketing, you may want your picture, you may want it to be more colorful.
I was just going to ask you, because that's a controversial one. Talk about the beauty bubble from 2 episodes ago.
Yeah.
Do you put a picture? Is that tacky, or is that expected for certain roles?
I think only in certain marketing jobs, and make sure you're really good looking if you're going to do that. I always put Brad Pitt on mine.
Yeah, smart.
No, not generally speaking, but if it's a certain type of marketing position, I have heard people say that they do put their picture and they make it look like a marketing platform,
Okay.
But generally speaking, yeah, I don't think that's a great idea. But they certainly easily need to be able to contact you, of course.
Right.
And things like that. But again, a resume is only an outline, and that's how people need to see it. If they're interested in you and you got the right verbiage in there, the interview is the time that you're going to expound on everything in that resume.
I want to ask you something that this personally happened to me when I was I really wanted to have more of a work-life balance. And I had started asking around about this. It was a job that was not a leadership role. And it was, I'll just be open, it was a recruiter role, because I always knew I'd be good at that. And I wanted to transition out of leadership into an individual contributor role. And I was told multiple times that I was overqualified and I would not enjoy it because I wouldn't have a team working for me. I'm curious, do you think that people come across that often, or is that just really a poor assessment by the person that has the opening?
Kristin, when you're a leadership coach, everyone thinks, I've had people apologetically talk to me and say, I'm miserable in this management position. I'm thinking about going back to sales. Some people even made more money in sales.
Right.
I surprised them. I go, if that's where your passion is and you're going to be happy, go for it. So I think management, I'm not going to say, obviously, Kristin, I've known you a while, you have the leadership skills and all that, but there comes a time when you can get burned out. You can just you're just tired of it. You need a new adventure. And I ask everyone, people think, oh, I got a $3 an hour raise, or I got $5,000 a year, or if I step down, I'm going to lose $5,000 per year. After taxes, after everything is factored in, it's not much money. Yeah. And is it really worth, like you said, losing sleep, having health problems? You want to retire healthy.
Right.
So I tell people, go for it. Make sure a few minor adjustments on your asset or on your liabilities and monthly expenses, and go for it.
But what's a good way to combat someone saying you're overqualified when maybe on paper you are, but you are looking to really kind of lessen responsibilities in a sense, or at least have all the responsibilities on you versus managing a large team?
You should say, don't hold my awesomeness against me.
I know. I was dumbfounded. I was really like, really?
You have to sell them on you have to sell them on your passion, but there's some people are rigid. You can't always change ingrained behavior or people's thought patterns, but you would have to sell them on your passion. This is what I want to do. I get it. You think I'm overqualified, but I'm going to do a darn good job, and I'm going to get the best of the best to work at this company.
And I know I'm not alone on that. I've had so many people tell me that just in my past 20 years in my career, where they've been told they're overqualified for something they really wanted to do. So I think it's good for leaders listening to be more open-minded for someone that is in leadership. Don't be intimidated by them coming in. Maybe they were once your peer. I think it's good for someone to be able to recognize when they want a bit of a change and to chase after it. All right. Lastly, I want to go back to everyone, be patient with yourself. If you've made a career change, it takes time. As Ron alluded to, it can take a couple years to really be firing on all cylinders after making a change. It takes years to understand your new field to the way you once understood your previous industry. So career advancement, it's a gradual process for most.
Very true. And last week we talked about vision, is set in stone, etched in stone. 5 years from now, this is where I want to be. But your mission, You may have to make some adjustments. That doesn't mean, you say you throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
You got to be learning. I've made numerous adjustments in the way I do business. Kristin knows some things that I'm going to share when we talk more about marketing, entrepreneurship, of some ways to sell. But you don't just give up. Now, again, if nothing is happening, you definitely want to look at some of your strategies, policies, procedures,
the way you're doing
business. Yeah, you may need to go back to the drawing board, but it may be some minor adjustments. Mm-hmm. And it might be that you're just not working hard enough or not being assertive enough. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be honest, Kristin. I had dealt with criminals. I'd done all this stuff, but I was very intimidated about pricing my work.
Yes.
And frankly, I hired a coach. That was my primary goal, was how do I sell my business, my intellectual property, myself? Mm-hmm. How do I sell that, and how do I price that? And it's amazing, but whatever you do repeatedly, you build your courage to do it.
Yes.
And now I don't have any problem. As a matter of fact, I basically turned down something not long ago because they didn't want to pay, and I wasn't going to travel that far for what they offered.
Right.
So your confidence will build as you do something repeatedly.
Yes, absolutely. That's great advice. Well, we're done. That's it. So for everyone listening, if you were teetering on making a career change, I can only imagine that this has been more than insightful for you, and hopefully you have the confidence to move forward with it now. And you'll put a plan in place.
Kristin, I want to just recap a few things here. Please listen. In closing, don't remain in misery. No. Misery isn't worth it. Research and prepare. Get those mentors we talked about. Get those volunteers. Write down your have-tos and your need tos. In other words, I have to have this. I need to have this. Mm-hmm. When the time is right, you got to jump, assess, but don't give up too easily. And as you go up, take others with you. It'll pay off.
Yes, it will. Thank you. That was a great closer, Ron. I love that.
Yeah, I just threw that in for you, Kristin.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Excellent.
So, Kristin,
where can people find us?
You can find
us wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to like, share, rate. And if you want to listen and watch, we are on YouTube and Rumble. You can share those out as well.
You know what I realized, Kristin? If they've listened to the whole podcast or watched it, they've already found us.
They have already found us. So they need to find us on every platform that we just named off.
Yes.
Like us everywhere, rate us everywhere, share us everywhere.
All right, everybody. We appreciate you. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.